If J.B. Prisker is the answer, what's the question?
You want me to answer that?
It's an old thing from Philosophy 101, Tom. I don't know that there
Is that
is an
rhetorical?
answer.
Good evening and welcome to Real Clear Politics for Tuesday, March 18th. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Philip Wegmann, our White House reporter. Gentlemen, we had a meeting today, a phone call that took place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Much anticipated. Phil, what exactly took place during this phone call, which I am told lasted 2 hours?
That's a long phone call between President Trump and his counterpart in Russia. The president has long said that he wants this war in Ukraine to come to an end. And from the readout that we got from the White House, it seems that both parties have agreed that they are going to begin negotiations. Putin agreed to a preliminary ceasefire. We'll see when that actually takes place. But this is what the Trump administration has been working for these first couple of weeks that they've been in office. They're trying to get to the end of the beginning so that they can end this war altogether. Notably, what is absent from this readout between Trump and Putin is any type of fireworks. Both Trump and Putin, they know each other. They're known entities. And while Trump isn't as aggressive in his description of the Russian dictator, he doesn't trust the guy. That much is clear from his moves on arming the Ukrainians during his first term, from his moves on Nord Stream. I think this is just two folks who know each other pretty well, who are circling one another before they get into the ring and actually begin trading diplomatic blows to get this thing to an end.
Carl, what about that boxing analogy? Is this just they're feeling each other out before they're gonna the heavyweight fight is gonna actually come to blows?
Well, this is interesting, Tom. There was something in that statement that the White House put out, their readout, that said this war should never have started. Donald Trump has said that. Oh, he said that 100 times if he said it once. But Vladimir Putin, that's an off ramp for Vladimir Putin as well. And I noticed this for the first time, and I wonder if he's associating. I'd be interested to see as these negotiations take place if he associates himself with that, because so Trump is blaming Joe Biden for the war, not Vladimir Putin. This gives Putin a face-saving desire to also blame Joe Biden and Barack Obama for the war, not himself for invading this country. And he expected to take it over in 3 days. They pushed me into this because they kept bringing up NATO, and it's partisan democratic politics, but it's also international diplomacy. We've never known how Vladimir Putin he could get out of this even if he wanted to now. And if this rhetorical tick of Trump's, maybe there's something to it more than vanity. Maybe he's giving Vladimir Putin an out that he can take and agree to stop fighting.
Well, we'll see how this plays out. They said that the negotiations are going to take place in the Middle East, and that was a place where there could be cooperation between, I guess, Russia and the United States. So a lot more coming on that story. But Mr. Wegmann, Chuck Schumer has a book out apparently, and he delayed the launch of his book out of quote unquote security concerns after the government shutdown vote. He was facing a huge amount of blowback from folks on his left, and apparently he didn't feel it was safe to go out in public and do his book tour. He also, Phil, did what I would call a damage control tour. He was on a couple of shows this morning, CBS News, CBS This Morning, and then The View, where he tried to basically defend, his position, but also say that Democrats were united and everything's going to be fine. How much blowback is Schumer getting? Is he on shaky ground? Is he trying to fight off sort of a mutiny from his caucus and/or a primary challenge from one youthful House member from the state of New York?
Well, certainly Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has much more energy in fighting back against Republicans, but Schumer has a longer memory. He's looking at the position the Democrats are in currently, and he's saying, wait a minute, this is oddly similar to the fights that consumed Republicans during the Obama years. Not that long ago, you had Republicans like Senator Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, demanding that their leadership use the shutdown to force then President Barack Obama to go back on his marquee piece of legislation, Obamacare. Well, spoilers, Obamacare is here, and Republicans got blamed for that shutdown. So I think that Schumer has a bit of a longer memory here. The fight over the continuing resolution, which I know our listeners in the West Wing will not like this, but that continuing resolution basically has the same spending levels as Biden. This was not the fight, at least in Schumer's mind, to have, and he's weathering the blowback right now.
Carl, you've covered Washington and Chuck Schumer for a long time. You've seen him, work his way up the ranks.
I remember when he was in the House.
Was this a smart move? Did he save the party from itself, or was this the beginning of the end for Chuck Schumer?
Well, maybe both. He may have given himself up for the team, Tom. Obviously, Democrats screaming how much they love federal workers and then voting to shut the government down was, that was cognitive dissonance. Only AOC would find logic in that. I didn't. Chuck Schumer didn't. That was a lopsided vote in the Senate. It wasn't just Chuck Schumer wasn't like the deciding vote. They had, 40 votes to spare. Most of almost, all but 10 or 11 of the Democrats voted in favor of it to keep the government open because that's been their default position. She's grandstanding. She's trying to get attention. So is he, though. I don't necessarily believe that ruse about the security in the book and it wasn't safe to go on book tour. Hell, it's a pretty good marketing tool, Tom. We wouldn't be talking about this book if he hadn't said that. I didn't know he was writing a book. Who would care?
He's lying. Chuck Schumer's lying?
Who cares Chuck Schumer's writing a book? Who cares any senator's writing a book? There's a great book critic at the Philadelphia Inquirer, John Packenham was his name. He used to call politicians' books like this unbooks. They're not even real books. They're unbooks. But Schumer's on The View, and he couldn't help himself. He was basically repeating that mantra that if you built a business, the government really did that for you. You didn't do that by yourself. And went on and said, these people, they don't want to pay taxes. They think it's their money. And it was like, if you just heard that, just that one paragraph, you didn't know anything who Chuck Schumer was, you would assume he was a member of the American Communist Party. It was like it was just something, it was bizarre. I know what he meant, where he's coming from. It's that old Elizabeth Warren thing that these people take the infrastructure, they go to college at public universities, they do all these, they benefit from society and then form a business and they don't want to give back. But he took that and went too far with it. But of course, Whoopi Goldberg liked it. So
right.
I guess it's okay.
Phil, let me just read you the results of a question from a CNN survey that came out over the weekend. Okay. And it says, this is for Democratic voters only. Thinking about the Democratic leaders today, which one person best reflects the core values of the Democratic Party? This was an open-ended question. They weren't given a list of responses and had to choose from it. They could pick anybody they want. Top of the list at 10%, the aforementioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Number 2 at 9%, Kamala Harris. Number 3 at 8%, Bernie Sanders. Number 4 at 6%, Hakeem Jeffries. Barack Obama at 4%, Jasmine Crockett at 2%, Gavin Newsom 2%, Nancy Pelosi 2%, Alyssa Slotkin 2%, Chuck Schumer 2%. So it turns out that maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does have her pulse or finger on the pulse of the Democratic Party in a way, that Chuck Schumer does not.
Mm-hmm. And certainly Republicans are going to be delighted by that list because they've been fundraising off of all of these people. They've been pointing to AOC for the better part of half a decade as the boogeyman that is going to destroy everything, even as a lot of her ideas become sort of more mainstream within the Democratic Party. I think what we're seeing currently is Democrats very much are in disarray. That's not trite. Instead, it's a description of what's happening currently. And And there is this push and pull inside the party currently at a moment where they don't have defined leadership. There are some who are saying we got to go all out and we need to have resistance 2.0 and fight the Trump administration on every single little battlefield over
Does that work so well the first time?
because it worked so well the first time. And then you have the James Carvilles of the world who are saying, wait for Donald Trump to overextend, wait for him to be his own worst enemy, and then we'll come in and swoop in. It seems that Schumer, at least on the tactics here, didn't want to fight over the CR. Others were out for blood immediately and wanted to have this battle. But I think that this is a storyline that we're going to be focusing on going forward for some time as Democrats try and find their way out of the wilderness.
Indeed, Carl. We've talked about it a lot on this program already, and we're not even 100 days into the new administration. Perry Bacon in the Washington Post this morning wrote this, Carl. The title on his piece was, "These 6 Democrats are showing the party how to resist Trump 2.0." And the 6 Democrats that were pictured at the top of the piece, some of these names we just talked about: Jasmine Crockett, AOC, Bernie Sanders, but also Chris Murphy, Tim Walz, and in the middle, J.B. Pritzker. What do you make of that group? And is this as we said, they tried resisting Trump 2.0 the first time around. It didn't go so well. It actually ended up getting him reelected eventually. So is this, for a party that is now seeing their approval ratings hit all-time lows, is this the smart way to move forward?
Well, Perry Bacon is he's a columnist from the liberal side, and he picked 6 of the most, mouthy and outspoken Democrats. So that's one theory of the case, that you're going to compete with each other to see who can call Trump the most names and, undermine what he's doing the most. And what you just said, Tom, is right. I don't think Trump did win this election. Now, I don't think that he has a right to pretend the judiciary doesn't exist because he won an election, but he certainly is within his rights to tell the Democrats that these things that I'm doing that you are shrieking about, I ran on them and I won. Now, he didn't run in their districts or their states. So you have this polarized country, gerrymandered House districts, these polarized the red and blue states. But I'll leave you with this thought, because he's your governor. If J.B. Pritzker is the answer, what's the question?
You want me to answer that?
It's an old thing from Philosophy 101, Tom. I don't know that there is an answer. I don't know that there is an answer to
it. So Phil, the aforementioned Governor Tim Walz was on Gavin. So Gavin Newsom's got his new podcast. We've talked about it, right? He had Charlie Kirk on, and then he had Steve Bannon on. So now he has Tim Walz on. And Walz says on this podcast, Gavin Newsom says, listen, we should fight, and I commend you for trying to fight and not lay down, like Carville wants them to do. But he said also, you can't just, dismiss folks and their views and ignore them. You've got to engage with them. And Walz said, number one, he said he thought he could kick their ass, meaning, and he said, I don't know if we need to get in a WWE thing, but he was sort of like, playing tough guy, which I thought was a little odd. And then he said that when Gavin Newsom said, talk to some of these people, he's talking about the folks online who had won over young men in particular. And Walz said these were bad guys, meaning Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and presumably Joe Rogan and some of the other folks that were part of the alternative media that helped convert some of these young men, and said they need to be shoved back under a rock, and that their motivations were all based on racism and misogyny. Is that the message that Democrats are going to go with to try and win back some of these voters? I mean, it seemed to me just more of the same that got them in the position that they're in right now.
Well, first of all, the message was weird, given that it was Governor Walz, who by a lot of accounts did not do very well during the debate with Vice President J.D. Vance. I mean, Vance had his way with the governor. At times it was painful to watch. So I'm not sure if that Minnesotan should be talking so tough. But then also it's strange because of the medium. Gavin Newsom, whether you love him or hate him, is doing something new with his show, right? We talk about how we wish politicians would actually stop talking past one another, that they would look for common ground rather than just taking cheap pot shots at the opposition. And then here comes Walz, who doesn't seem to have gotten that message and starts sort of perhaps unknowingly telling Newsom that his entire project is stillborn, that it's a bad idea. It's very strange to me. What strikes me, though, as throughout this entire conversation, as it seems the left is looking for a new champion, is that they have yet to grapple with the fact that more than any social policy, more than any foreign policy, fundamentally, if you look at exit polls, I mean, those other things were there: abortion, LGBTQ issues, so on and so forth. But more than anything, this was an election that was about the economy. It was about tackling inflation, and they have not landed on a message that resonates with average voters. They do really well on MSNBC and on shows like The View, but they haven't landed on a message or a messenger that can land outside of those forums.
Carl, we got 30 seconds left, and I'm gonna give you the last word. But I watched this clip and I thought to myself for the first time, and I'm gonna agree with you. I was like, you know what, Gavin Newsom actually gets it. He's the one in this conversation that actually has some recognition, realization, has maybe had some introspection about what happened, and seemed much more of a plausible way forward for Democrats than Tim Walz.
Well, I don't need the last word then, Tom. You've said it. You've said it well yourself. The obvious.
I'm on
leader,
the Newsom train with you, Carl.
The obvious leader of this party
Move over.
Is hiding in plain sight.
All right, we are going to leave it there. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with Peter Berkowitz, a regular columnist for us and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, former State Department official, and an expert on the Middle East. And the Middle East is on fire again today, Peter. So Israel made good on their threats. They finally had enough of Hamas stalling, and they attacked again today.
Yes, that's right. As Prime Minister Netanyahu stated, Israel had accepted a couple different offers that White House envoy, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff had proposed to extend the ceasefire and return all the hostages, who, by the way, have now been held at least 530 days by Hamas in these terror tunnels. Israel accepted the proposals. Hamas rejected the proposals, and Israel had warned that it was going to resume fighting if they could not extend the ceasefire. So Netanyahu is making good on his promise.
I noticed. I had a sense of deja vu all over again. Immediately, the entity described in the American media as the Hamas Health Ministry. The Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas, said 400 civilians have been killed. And the press, the Washington Post, went that right away. So did everybody else. There's no verification of that. I don't know how many civilians have been killed, but Israel says they killed at least 4, maybe 6 top Hamas commanders. That's what they're trying to do, right?
Look, the Israel Defense Forces are filled with lawyers. And filled with people who are holding the commanders and the soldiers' feet to the fire. The Israelis are a notoriously loquacious people, argumentative people. If the IDF, we're not talking about the politicians, the Israel Defense Forces releases a number, my strong inclination is to rely upon it, as I know in your business, our business now, we check it even if our mother says it. But still, there's a lot more credibility there. Whereas it seems to me we should presume prevarication on the part of the Hamas health ministry. They're devoted to it, to lying. They justify it in religious terms. They regard themselves in a holy war in which all means, as we've seen by their brutality and atrocities, all means are sanctified by their end, which is the destruction of Israel.
So am I to make of this complaints from very bitter, a minority of people, but some of the hostage families were really denounced Netanyahu today in Israel. They're angry about it. They say that he's given up on the hostages and that he's consigning them to the fate of Hamas commanders. Is that, I mean, well, what do you think of that?
I think that the hearts of these family members are understandably broken. They do have reason to fear that the hostages will be retaliated against by Hamas for the renewal of attacks. At the same time, it's reasonable to suppose that Hamas will do its best to keep some hostages still alive, to continue to use as bargaining chips somewhere down the line. But the families are right. With each day that their loved ones stay in captivity, the likelihood of them returning alive decreases. Netanyahu at the same time has responsibility for the entire country, and weighing these awful, tragic choices and trade-offs.
From the outside, what does Hamas want with keeping these people? How does that help them? It doesn't seem to me to help them. It seems to keep the war going, or where they are not winning. But there must be a theory there. They're doing it for a reason.
We know what Hamas's aim is. Its charter declares, this has never been amended, the destruction of Israel. And Israel or a think tank in Israel just released today classified documents translated from the Arabic, in which Hamas, since 2019, in full cooperation with Iran and Hezbollah, has been planning a war for the destruction of Israel. The preferred scenario, Hamas's preferred scenario, was a multi-front simultaneous attack: Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, proxies in Iranian proxies in Iraq and Syria. So you say, what do they want from the hostages? They want whatever they think will further their ultimate end, which is the destruction of Israel. So from their point of view, holding on to them, tearing the country apart, turning the families against the prime minister is advantageous to them.
All right, then we got 1 minute left. Let me ask you the really hard question. Given that they've been planning this war now for 5 or 6 years, what does Israel do to neutralize Hamas? They've reduced half the Gaza to rubble. They've killed all their leaders. They've killed thousands of Hamas fighters. But what's the step that really ends this?
The step that really ends this. Look, the latest reports tell us that they're still 25,000 fighters strong. They've lost 20,000. They've recruited another 10 or 15,000. Israel can reach another ceasefire, but the determination to destroy Israel on Hamas's part is the result of indoctrination that begins from a very young age. The only way that Israel will ever see peace is if this destructive education in radical Islam is ended.
Well, that's a tall order. Peter, thank you for that report. You've been listening to Peter Berkowitz, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, a regular RCP columnist, former State Department official who's expert on the Middle East. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM Radio. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by James S. Robbins. He is the Dean of Academics at the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Andy, how are you?
Good. So, Jim, I want to talk to you today, get a sort of overview of Trump's foreign policy, specifically when it comes to what he's doing with the bureaucracy. He has, as we know, basically shuttered the Agency for International Development, and now he's moving to close down the Voice of America and these other public diplomacy agencies and organizations. So what is the effect of all this on our ability to conduct foreign affairs, and what do you make of the campaign?
Well, I think that an important thing to remember is that we're just at the start of the administration. So many of these actions that they're taking is just kind of a shock and awe approach to attack the areas in which they think that there's rot or there's corruption or there's resistance or people in government or in the bureaucracy who think that it's their job to resist American policy and resist what the president wants. And so they've been attacking those with a lot of fury. We saw that USAID, and I am certain that in the future, the United States will get back that capacity. I mean, it was not completely eliminated, but drawn in further into the State Department, and we'll see that build back over time. I think the same thing is true with Voice of America and everything at U.S. Agency for Global Media. Right now, it looks like they're just abandoning all this, but I don't think that that's the plan. I think that they're just going to try to reform it, maybe get Congress involved in reforming it, and then bring it back.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So your position is that it needs to be reformed, but
Yes.
basically, do you think we need a Voice of America or something like it?
Oh, 100%. Voice of America dates back to World War II when we were trying to reach out to people in occupied Europe. We're fighting the war to let them know what was really going on in the world, which they didn't get from totalitarian regimes. We had things like Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which are still important ways to get information to people who live in countries where they don't get the news, particularly about their own countries. They don't get the news. And so that was the purpose of all this. And then reaching out to the developing world with the message about the United States, what a great country this is, how great freedom is, all of the opportunities that we offer and that they can have as well in their countries. These are very important, particularly because our adversaries are out there 24/7 sending out their messages about how terrible our country is, how great they are, and competing in that information space. We can't just unilaterally disarm and just hand it over to them. In the developing world, in Europe, in the Middle East, we need to have that presence. So I think that everybody in the system understands this. It will just be reformed and brought back because right now we were not fulfilling that mission. Voice of America was more concerned about attacking President Trump and being critical of the United States than telling America's story, which is really what it's there for.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing about about the public diplomacy. I want to talk about the 8 agencies in a minute, but this public diplomacy, because the idea is that these were set up largely to be independent. Not all of them, but the Voice of America certainly. And they were supposed to not be subjected to political control because the idea was by having objective journalists out there doing their job, it would appear or it would that was the message. The message was twofold. It was, yes, we want to advance America's foreign policy agenda, but more importantly, we want to demonstrate to the world why a free press is important. So these were always sort of hybrid missions. And I'm just wondering, when you talk about reforming it, are we going to stay on that path, or do you think we should make it more of an agency that sort of speaks for the administration or for U.S. foreign policy goals?
The thing about that hybrid mission was, like, in particular the VOA, they went all the way over on the press side. They were particularly abandoning any idea that they were there to support American strategy or American policy. Mm-hmm. They saw themselves as a news organization, period. And with all that entails, and increasingly a news organization, particularly in the Trump first term and also now, that was critical of American foreign policy, critical of the president, and just not very helpful in terms of executing what we need to execute globally. So yes, you want to have a certain amount of the legitimacy of a news organization, but it can't just be a news organization because we already have news organizations. We have New York Times, we have the Washington Post. Recently, Kari Lake canceled the subscriptions, wire service subscriptions to AP, Reuters, and Agence France Presse, which if you looked at the VOA website, that was most of it. Most of what they were doing was just cut and pasting wire copy. Well, okay, fine, but you don't need to spend $1 billion of government money to run a cut and paste operation like that
Right.
Not only doesn't serve American national security interests, but in some cases we're in opposition to those very interests. It just doesn't make sense. Why would the government spend money on that? So that's where you really need reform. If you look back at the days of USIA with Edward R. Murrow and Charles Wick and people who had the ear of the president, I mean, Murrow was a cabinet level official. There was no question that they were there to implement American policy and to help with America's pro-freedom mission in the world. I mean, that was during the Cold War when we had that sense of mission. And then the end of history came, right? And all of this was reformed to give it more of a news focus. Well, history didn't end. And now our opponents in the information space, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, I don't know, North Korea, whoever's out there working in that area, they're eating our lunch. Throughout the developing world, like in Africa, all of the messaging is Chinese, how great China is, and to an extent, Russia. And we've like unilaterally disarmed because all our people are doing are like echoing what our domestic political points are about how evil Trump is or how great like progressive lifestyle issues are and stuff like this. That's not what we need. We need something that is much more aligned to executing a rational, coordinated national information strategy. And I think that's what we're going to get after we get through this period of reform.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Charlie Zwick. He was the director of USIA under Reagan. He was actually my boss briefly for a while. I was in Washington. It was my first job was working at USIA, and he was a terrific fellow. He was very short, but powerful presence, and really understood the importance of media, as did Ronald Reagan. And you would think that with between Kerry Lake and Donald Trump, there are two people who understand the power of the media and that they would understand the importance of this. So we'll see what happens going forward on this. Let's talk about AID for a minute, because Nick Kristof has a big piece in the New York Times saying lives are already being lost in Africa because cuts in U.S. aid. He points to PEPFAR. That's the AIDS program started under Bush back in 2003. Costs about $7.5 billion a year. Estimated to have saved 26 million lives. And it is one of those agents or a part of the AID mission that is supposed to continue, as I understand it, under the State Department. But they're complaining that that's not happening. And so I'm just wondering, in this transition period, do we lose sort of important levers of soft power if we don't handle these transitions correctly?
Well, I don't think that you lose them permanently. Obviously, there are going to be problems in any kind of massive reform effort like this. You're going to, throw out the good and the bad in some cases. I mean, that's undeniable when you're moving this fast. But again, the first term was really what set the stage for this. When you see the level of resistance and, sort of self-righteousness amongst government bureaucrats who felt that they didn't have to listen to President Trump. He was an illegitimate president that, had been installed by Russia, and they're fighting the good fight to, oppose him. No, that's not it. He's the duly elected president of the United States. And because the first term methods didn't work, now we're in the second term. And again, it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. He's just rooting it all out and finding out in the process, yeah, there was a lot of bad stuff happening. Okay, you can focus on the good things that USAID did, and yes, there are some good things, but at what cost? I mean, if you have aid to Haiti, where like a fraction of a percent of it is actually getting to Haiti, where half of the money allocated to Haiti was being spent inside the Beltway, and 40% or more was being spent elsewhere, but not in Haiti. Well, what does that mean? What does that tell us? Where's that money going? There's a lot of corruption in the system. And a lot of this money was coming back to actually fuel American politics and to push a left-wing agenda. So that's the kind of stuff that needs to get rooted out. And yeah, it may cause some disruptions along the way, but it's necessary because a lot of this money was simply being wasted. It was simply being funneled to NGOs to fund their own things and not getting to the people who need it. So if you can cut 90% of their budget and still have the same impact with the remaining 10%, that tells you how much waste was in the system.
Yeah. Well, Jim, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for being on the program today. Great to have you here. You've been talking to Jim Robbins. He's the Dean of Academics at the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. That's our program for today. On behalf of Tom, Carl, and everyone here at Real Clear Politics, thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a good evening.